University, who'll be able to bring us through some of that. And hopefully we see this relationship grow as we go forward. So, Carol, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, I always fumble around with the microphone. Too close, too far away. First off, thank you to all of you for being here. It's been great. I've really enjoyed the sessions this morning, and I'm looking forward to more this afternoon. Thanks to Jocelyn and John for putting the whole thing on, and again for inviting me to be part of it, both day of today, but also in, as John just alluded to, sort of this ongoing partnership and collaboration to try and dig into some of the data we have and look at collecting more data in the future to see if we can make it useful and informative and actually helpful in trying to move the game forward, move clubs forward, et cetera. So today I will be talking about essentially, I know my talk listed as retention is important, and that is the core essence of what I'm talking about. The data, get kind of splitting hairs here. What I'll be showing you, the data I'll be showing you, really is participation data. And then I've also listed sort of recruitment and retention. They're not that we're going to like subdivide everything, but I just think it might have slightly differential implications depending on what we're talking about. Hopefully that'll make more sense as we go through. Before I get started, though, a little bit about myself. So as John mentioned, I'm at York University, I'm a professor there. I do research, sort of my discipline is sports psychology, but really my focus is on youth and athlete development in sport. I often focus on coaches, but also sport environments that facilitate or constrain athlete development. Today, I'll be presenting this work. This is data that comes from Rugby Ontario. There, so we've been the analytic partner here. I'm also presenting on behalf of sort of our research team. There's a PhD student of mine, Sam Burrell, who played a bit of rugby, and an undergraduate student, CJ Jodoralpha. And they expressed their sort of apologies. They wish they could be here, but they couldn't make it today. And in terms of my own background, sounds like many of you, started playing rugby in high school, played a number of years, actually in Kingston, of the Kingston Panthers Club. Actually met my wife there. She's a much better player than I am. And now we were in the US for a little while, so got away from the game, but now getting back into although I'm professionally located at York, I actually live in the Peterborough area, so reconnected with the Peterborough Pagans Club. And actually dipping my toe back in the non-contact and touching the flag waters just to try and get myself back into it. I also have a background in coaching. I do a lot of coaching in rugby, and again, there's a lot of my research. So I've done everything from little kids, heavily involved with a minor program in Kingston when I was first starting out. I do most of my coaching at the high school level. I still coach there today, and dabble in some clubs and college level stuff. Yeah, so I'm heavily invested in this. Again, this interests me both as a researcher, but also as a member of the rugby community. So I'm really, really appreciative of the opportunity, both to be part of the project and to have a little bit of a chat here today. So, in terms of what I'll be trying to cover, I'm going to give a sort of just a super quick and dirty overview of general sport participation in Canada, just some big picture trends, just for some context, right? To understand, okay, so how does rugby in Ontario compare to or contrast with, again, these sort of bigger picture trends? Again, are we sort of on our own, or are we in line with bigger elements? I'm going to do super fast on that really big picture stuff. Then I'm going to dig into sort of the meat of the presentation, is the registration data from Rugby Ontario. Just a note, these are right now, the moment I'll be running today, is really macro view. So it's preliminary analysis, we're not done yet. But right now we've gotten through a lot of sort of the big picture kind of year by year comparisons. So that's what I'll be sharing today. We are still going on more in-depth analysis, getting eventually to looking at sort of individual level trajectories, trying to get to the level of being able to predict. Okay, so who is more likely to drop out or stay, or in particular roles, in athletes to coaches, etc. What I have for you today, though, again, is the big macro year by year comparisons on that. So just as sort of in your own interpretation and thinking of that as the context for the data I'll be showing. Again, this is big macro level data that I'm showing you. So much like Brian and Jasmine's talk, I think it was a great setup for a number of the things that I'm going to be talking about as well. I'm going to urge everyone to think of this in terms of, okay, to what degree does this reflect my club? Or to what degree does it align or not with what actually happened in my own club context, right? With the goal or working towards, again, as Brian and Jasmine set up, and I think it's really kind of a neat feature of the day of working towards sort of a strategic planning idea of not just like, oh, neat, right? The findings, but what can we actually do about that? What's worth spending time on, or what's feasible for our club to spend time on to move us forward in the direction that we want to go in terms of recruiting and retaining more players, more coaches, more officials, growing the game, as we were talking about. I will be peppering in a few insights from non-rugby research, again, just to help give a bit of context there. I'm going sort of really high level, superficial on that though, but happy to chat more if anybody's interested about anything that I bring up here this week. And I move around the rest of the day. If you have more questions, I can get into. I'm going to try and I was about 2 minds of this, of splitting it up or doing one thing. I think I'm going to try and blitz through everything that I got here, because I think some of the things link together, but then I would like to spend some time afterwards. Again, because this is macro, we want to make sure it works down to sort of actual practical, real actionable kind of stuff. Is a bit of kind of like we tried to do in the last session, of sort of group discussion, sort of small group discussion, and then share back. See if we can actually generate some insights of what might these things actually mean, or what's actually relevant on the ground. And then hopefully some time for questions. We'll see how far we get. Okay, so in terms of sport participation in Canada, again, I'm not sure how familiar folks are. Some of this may be obvious or stuff you already know, maybe not. But again, for context in terms of as a frame of reference for the stuff that I'm going to show you that is rugby specific in Ontario. First of all, I know after lots of worry during COVID, talking about our sports even going to come back, what's going to happen. The major trend, and again, this is like big macro perspective, is that participation rates do seem to be rebounding. People of all ages, kids, youth, adults, do seem to be participating again at rates equal to, or in some cases above even, where we were at before pandemic. That's not across the board. There are sort of ups and downs depending on particular sports, depending on particular context, depending on groups of people, right? But the big macro trend is that it does seem to be coming back, which is good. Right? A key feature, again, this has been around for years. Not sure if you've heard of this, so some of you may be familiar with it, but sort of one of the truisms about both sport and physical activity participation research is what we call the adolescent cliff, or the dropout cliff, which is basically that sport participation and physical activity participation kind of builds all the way through childhood, reaches its peak, around in the sort of 12-ish range, between 12 and sort of high school, and then drops off dramatically. As we say, like just falls off a cliff, right? And then basically continues on a downward trend from there. Right? That still very much exists. Luckily, we've seen in the last couple of years, again, macro trends, it seems to be flattening out a little bit. So maybe some progress in not losing like such a dramatic drop off in that early adolescent years, but it's still there. So that is sort of has been a feature of sport participation in Canada for a long, long time. Again, hopefully there's progress there. But so again, in judging rugby's numbers.
Is that per child or sport?
Sorry.
Is that per child or per sport?
Really macro perspective, just like number of young people participating in it, or like at age per year, and it's just like the absolute numbers drop off. Pretty similar trends, or has typically been the historical trend, is usually across sports, but again, slightly different patterns all the way through. Even just general physical activity, drop off. Despite the positive rebounds, the slight flattening of the curve, one thing that still consistently shows up, again, across sports, across more general physical activity, that women and girls are still underrepresented in participation numbers. Women and girls participate at lower rates than men and boys. In our again, regardless of how you count it. And that underrepresentation is particularly pronounced for those with racialized identities and those living with disabilities. So again, some good news, tempered a little bit. And understanding, and again, I think Ryan and Jasmine hit on that in terms of not just what is everybody doing, but who's doing it and or who's not. So that'll be sort of a frame for the rest of my talk here. So again, I'm going to kind of blitz through a bunch of this stuff with the idea of hopefully allowing as much time as possible for the chatting amongst us at the end. So I'm going to start kind of really general and then work my way a little bit more narrow as we go. So looking at sort of overall trends, starting on the athlete side of things here. So players, what's going on and what has been going on. Okay? So we've got, I'll align this because you probably can't see a lot of the like micro detail. What's important here and what I'll be drawing your attention to is mostly the shapes. And also I'll be pulling sort of what I think are some implications or some important elements out of each of these graphs. So you're going to see this shape a lot. Basically what we've got registration data for 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Okay, so that's the data we're working with. All of the anybody who registered with Rugby Ontario, got their data. These are the numbers on the side here. That changes from figure to figure. Mostly what I'm gonna focus on, again, are sort of the patterns and the shapes. You're going to be seeing a whole lot of figures that have this rough pattern, this sort of dip in the middle. That dip, that's 2020 and 2021. So those are your COVID years, fairly obvious, probably what's going on there. Right, so again, this is shape will be coming up. So what's shaped my thinking of this, we've got 2018 and 2019 as what you might consider sort of like our steady state comparison. Right, again, the pre-COVID, what were things like? Right? Now we've got at the other end, 22 to 2023, that's sort of our first initial peak trends coming out, right? That we can compare to before COVID. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay? So again, you're going to see this shape and some variation on this graph a lot, and I'll just be trying to draw a few implications from this. So first thing that I will highlight, each of these groups. So we've got the red at the bottom here, that's minors, and we've just bumped these by the very big registration categories here, right? So this is minors in the red with the triangles along the bottom. Seniors is the sort of brown with the little X's in the kind of in the middle most part. And then the gray with the squares, that is at least on the top over here, is juniors. So these are just absolute registration numbers for all players. So a couple of points to bring out on this. Much like overall participation trends, good news, right? It does seem like each group, if you look, say, 2019 to 2022, 2023, does seem like we've had the rebound, and we've actually even surpassed where things were before COVID, which is great news, right? Does seem like the seniors maybe rebounded a little bit quicker than the juniors coming back, but the juniors now on that upward trend. Again, it's only 2 years so far. We'll have to see if these numbers, these trend lines continue. But in general, as a picture, good news. Seems like we're hitting that rebound. Again, not all sports are, right? So that's good news for Rugby Ontario at the macro level. I'm going to spend the rest of the time kind of breaking this down a little bit. First, if we look by gender, and so again, just as a caveat here, I'm going to be talking male and female. We do have non-binary individuals in the data set, right, as self-identified. It is a very small number. We are still analyzing. We're looking to get sort of more individual trajectories on those experiences, so I'm not presenting that data here. Also, again, this is self-report, so and many individuals choose not to disclose that information. Right, so it's again with both self-report and the category of competition that they choose to register into is the framework. Okay, so just as a caveat when I'm talking about gender, when we look at the male players. So on this side here, to your left, again, broken down with minor, junior, seniors. Not sure if you can see the colors here. Again, minors in the red, seniors in the brown, and juniors in the gray. Looks like in this rebound, in this post-COVID rebound, seems to be the senior men that are driving the numbers on this one. Right? Juniors just crossing past the seniors, so down at this end of the grid here. So I'm looking at this, right? Good return on the minors, the seniors really popped up first, juniors catching up. Compare that to our female athletes, right? Again, same, minors red on the bottom, brown for seniors in the middle, juniors on the top. On the women's side of things, seems to be juniors driving the ship, right? So senior men's on the men's side, juniors on the women's side, in terms of driving the numbers here. Again, in terms of thinking about where are things going well, where are there opportunities for improvement here? And so as it stands there, just in terms of relative distributions of our players. And again, encourage you to think, is this representative of what you're seeing at your club or not? And why? And we'll get into those chats as we go. Further breaking this down, if we look by competition category, or sort of our age segment. First thing you'll notice here, so we've got green. The green lines are male, the purple lines are female here. Big takeaway for me across all of these, all three divisions, an underrepresentation of women and female players. Right? The green line's on top in all three places here. Right? We see that discrepancy happening right at the minors. Starting in the minors, carried through to the seniors. One thing to note for me, which is an interesting point, is that the discrepancy is lowest at the junior level. Right? Looking at the absolute numbers, this is sort of a glass, there's several instances here where it might be sort of a glass half full, glass half empty, depending on your perspective. All we have is the big picture numbers. So the interpretation is gonna come from the context, probably at the club level, at the local level, but it doesn't seem to me to be, given the sort of the absolute, absolute numbers here, that you have an underrepresentation of males at the junior levels. What it seems to me is that, at least at the macro level, junior seems to be a success story on the female side of things. Something good is happening there, right? We've caught up. Something is good is happening in the juniors. The kicker for me, and again, I'm over-interpreting here, from a short period of time. So maybe bear with me on this, but my instinctive interpretation here though is what's happening to all those female juniors? It doesn't seem to be carrying through in the transition across to senior participation. Right? If we're talking about retention, we're talking about keeping players for multiple seasons, especially the younger levels. That means transition across levels. So maybe we need to be paying attention to, okay, so what are the successes? What's going well at the junior level? What's getting in the way of that transition to keeping them in our clubs, in our programs at the senior level? And again, this can be complex and multifaceted, right? But drawing your attention. There are bright spots, but what's getting in the way there? Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, do you have any correlated data like societal indicators like, 2020 to 2022, women may have been shouldering a larger burden of care? Did you include any of those other correlated data points?
Not yet. This is just big macro stuff. This is exactly where we're going down the road. But these are very relevant and timely elements. So again, understanding differential responses to COVID and roles in COVID. But at the same time, I'd argue, like, for example, pickleball, right? Really high female participation rates. It's not necessarily that women are just not playing sports at all, right? But why aren't they staying? And again, many complex issues. So, coming?
But also, in the COVID period when there were junior girls who were at the 16 to 18 age group, didn't return to play senior because they didn't play junior. So that could also be a factor. I noticed that at our club, where normally we would have the transition from U18s to senior, and you would count a certain percentage of those juniors moving up to senior. But because they didn't have those junior years at the club, they haven't come back to senior.
This is a great point. And again, I'm sort of over-interpreting based on a couple of data points here. We'll have to see if that is what we call a cohort effect, like it's just the crew who didn't get juniors who aren't coming back, and if that'll bump up again once you've got some juniors here. My only thought is that even pre-pandemic, we were still seeing this big gap that wasn't as big up there. So again, I hope you're right on that, but it does, at least in my mind, makes that one of the consideration and known. So I saw that in the.
Yeah. Maybe that was any later slides. Have you broken out the age within the senior group?
No, we haven't yet. No, that's
what we would.
That is very fair. Yeah. No, when we're getting into those, again, individual level things where we're actually following individual players through and saying, okay, at what level.
That's what, yeah.
Do you drop off?
The conversion ratio between viewers and seniors and within that senior range. The millennials and Gen Zs that are, where do they go? A lot of them stop after the years.
And so again, this is where we're going with the data analysis.
Yeah.
I also think there's value to looking at more micro level, at club level, for our players, for our population. Who is dropping out, who is staying, where we have success, what's going on, why are they staying, why have they been in there? For the folks that aren't coming back, what's going on? Okay. Or who isn't coming back? Okay, I'll go there and then there. So hand up first.
Just want to confirm, this is players, coaches, and other types of things are not mixed into this number.
Nope, this is players only. Players only. Yep. So I'm going to be chatting with coaches a little bit down the line here, and touch on refs, but we didn't finish the data analysis in time for that one. But yeah, you're right. This is players only for this one. Sorry.
My question was answered.
Okay. Nice. All right. So again, as you'll see, this is kind of the theme of this presentation, but also this type of data analysis. Everything you see here is probably going to spark more questions than it gives you an answer, right? This is high level data, basically what we might call descriptive data. What's going on, right? And then it's our job, me as a researcher, data analysis, to dig in right? And there's more data coming, both from the data set we have here, also the player retention survey that went around, we're starting to dig into that, get some more answers. But I think also, again, to leverage those questions in our own work, right? And as we're making decisions at the club level, right? To what degree is this reflective of that? What's going on, at least at my level? What's happening? Why are some people staying and others leaving? That makes sense. So again, to me, it's descriptive data analysis to identify areas for us to poke at a little bit more, to probe out a little bit more to help us guide our decision. I'm thank you, by the way, for the questions that you gave. Yes. So again, for me, big message coming out of this: get underrepresentation of women, the relative success of our juniors, and then what's going well at juniors, what's happening before that, both in terms of, again, recruitment at the minor level where we're seeing a discrepancy still, and then potentially, again, I'm not sure, we'll have to see how this plays out and larger societal factors, but retention rate in the senior. What's happening? Bouncing to ethnicity, self-identified ethnic and racial bias here. Again, you probably can't see a lot of the data, but it's the big picture that you can see that is the story for me, right? In all three, so again, this is minors, juniors, and seniors. I've only presented the 2023 year here just for simplicity's sake, but basically the same patterns emerge any year we look at. Right? The biggest bars here, and again, so the green continuing on are the male players, the purple are female athletes, athletes only on this one. The big bars at every single level, players who identify as white. Maybe not shocking, probably in line with a lot of other sports, right? In every single category, the next three bigger are undisclosed, so didn't share, or I do not identify with these categories, right? Depending on the personal identification, right? But the big story here is the relative lack of our diversity of representation in basically any other racial ethnic group, self-identified. Right? So wondering to what degree are our athletes, our participants, actually representative of the communities that we serve? Again, depending on where you are, this may be fairly representative. If we look at some of the most decent, our recent detailed analysis from the 2016 survey or census, roughly 30% of Ontarians identify as a racialized identity. In the GTA, that's up over 50%. The numbers have only gotten up since 2016. So at least at the macro level, we are clearly not representative of the province as a whole. So again, the idea here is what's going on there? What is working for the players that we do have? Brian and Jasmine talked about, like, what's the feeling that's keeping them there, that's drawing them there, that's making them feel welcome, walk through the door? That is not being felt by the other segments of our population who might love and enjoy rugby, but at the moment aren't. So to me, this is a pretty big one. Right? Again, it doesn't tell us what to do or how to do it, but it can open our eyes. And so again, this is macro level data. I urge you to think, is this representative or not of my own club population? Right? So again, big story across all, overrepresentation of athletes who identify as white, drastic underrepresentation relative to the Ontario population of racialized individuals. I'm gonna highlight one thing and I'll come to you. Oh, sorry.
What's the distribution in the general population?
The general population, again, across racialized categories, about, again, depends on your area, about 3 in 10 in Ontario, getting up to 4 in 10, most, and above 5 in 10, about 50% in the GTA, particularly in higher metropolitan areas. I was getting up there as well. So comparing what the rest of Ontario looks like to the population that we're serving, seems to be a bit of a mismatch. I will highlight one element, and I'm probably reaching here because the numbers are really small. But the second thing that follows through on this follows from the last slide when we talked about gender, where the green bars, the green lines were always higher, and that's the same thing here, right? And so it makes sense, the same data is reflected across, right? We have more men and boys than girls and women playing, except in one category. The numbers are really small here, so I don't want to overinterpret this, right? But in juniors, again, juniors, something's going on with juniors. Right? For those junior athletes who identify as Black, we actually have more female participants than male. Again, this could be a glass half empty, glass half full. Maybe we're not doing a very good job with the Black identifying male junior age groups, or there's at least room for optimism potentially, again, we're still talking small numbers here, right? Still talking underrepresentation relative to the Ontario population, but maybe there's room for optimism in terms of efforts to recruit and retain Black identifying female teachers. Again, the question comes down to, does that carry over then into the season? And again, you highlighted it's early days here. We need to see if the trends continue. So far, not reflected into the senior levels yet. So again, that was sorry, my time. Again, super macro level snapshots on the player side of things. Okay, so got participation coming back. Women and girls underrepresented still, but maybe some bright spots at the junior levels, and particularly maybe in terms of some reach out, again, very tender, right at the junior levels with some of the work we may be doing for Black identifying female athletes. Again, the whole point of this is not to make judgments good or bad, but to say what's going on here. Why is this happening? Right? Why are we retaining folks that we are? Why are we not retaining or even recruiting at the beginning the folks who aren't here, who are underrepresented in our data? And what does that tell us about what we're doing, who's benefiting, who's not, what we're doing, who's feeling welcomed through the door, who's not? And how does that shape our efforts in decision making going forward and our efforts to recruit and retain more athletes to grow the sport and grow our clubs? In doing that, I'm going to highlight just a few things. And again, this is a summary across a huge body of research. Right? So this is just really macro level stuff in terms of why do athletes stay? Right? For the top out. Again, aligns a lot with what Brian and Jasmine talked about this morning in terms of what people need out of sport. Right? It comes down to a few different factors. The first one is experiential, the in the moment thing. Right? People are more likely to stay involved in a sport if it's fun, if it's enjoyable. 99.99% of folks in rugby or every sport that we play are not making a dime of it. Right? It is by definition a recreational activity, even if we take it really seriously and try to perform at the highest level. Right? If it's not fun and enjoyable, and that doesn't mean necessarily frivolous, but if it's meaningful and worthwhile to us and what we're looking for, right, then people will stay. If it's not, there are a million other things to do, including sitting on the couch. Right? Why would I stay if it's not meaningful? So we need to pay attention to the in the moment experience, right? Because that's a major, major driver of whether people decide to stay or decide to go. Right? Within that, nature of the sport setting, right? The idea for called developing confidence. But am I getting better? Am I growing? Does it feel like I'm getting something out of this? Especially if we're in a competitive setting where we're going to training. Well, is it worthwhile going to training? Do I feel like I'm getting better? Right? Again, it's a major driver of whether people decide to stay or go. And we know this is again across multiple sports, multiple areas across age groups. Right? If I don't feel like the effort I'm putting in or being asked to put in actually pays off for me, why would I do it? Right? So again, are we adding value? Are we providing meaningful in the moment experience? Right? And again, going back to our sort of relative over and under representation, who is getting this positive experience? And maybe who isn't feeling it? Right? Whether by intention or by design, or sort of by accident. Another major feature are the social factors. And again, this came up again with sort of the data that was shared earlier, right, about why people play. Social factors are huge. Again, for young people, for youth, but even up into adulthood. In sports settings, and this one we can't dance around, the coach makes a difference. This is one of the single biggest predictors of athlete retention, is the quality of relationship with the coach. Yes, tied into developing confidence, right? The coach has that functional role here, but it's more than that, right? It's, do I believe that the coach has my best interest in mind? Do I believe that this person cares about me? Do I believe this person is treating me fairly, right? In comparison to the others around me. Right? If we don't have those things, all the best other stuff kind of goes out the window, at least from in terms of a predictive capacity. Coaches have a major role in sport. We can't get around that.
Are you drawing on qualitative data points for the relationship, or are you inferring?
No, this is summaries of decades worth of research, both qualitative and quantitative. And in quantitative, if I had to pick one thing that's going to be the strongest predictor, if I was allowed to measure one thing for athletes that would allow them to guess whether or not they're coming back, this is high on the list for me. This other stuff matters, but based on the research, it's really strong.
I meant specifically for the coach-athlete relationships.
Yep. Yep, that has been demonstrated quantitatively with pretty rigorous measurements, as well as qualitative or qualitative. Yeah, that's a very, again, I'm not saying the rest of it doesn't matter, but that is a really strong one. If we don't have that, a lot of the rest of it falls apart. Especially since the coach is a major part of setting a lot of these other, a lot of these other dimensions. Does that make sense? Again, happy to talk to you more stuff later. Next is pure social dynamics. Again, talked this morning about like having a plan there, knowing that I'm included. Again, some of the stuff coming out of the retention survey that we haven't fully analyzed yet, and some of the qualitative components, talking about, you know, the benefits of having a friend, like a welcoming community, but also the folks who are thinking about leaving, talked about please, right? And feeling excluded from the social group, right? This is a major part, especially for the younger groups, but for everybody, right? The idea of those peer social dynamics, right? Do I have close relationships, friendships in that sport? Do I feel included in that? And in the larger sense, meaningful community membership. Do I feel like I'm part of something? Right? Beyond just like me showing up for my 2 hours and then going home with my team, right? Am I part of something larger? And to me, this is where rugby has sort of a built-in advantage, right? That club structure, that club ethos that everybody's talked about already, right? In terms of developing that, you've got a thing that you are part of, right? Your U6 is in the same club as your, you know, U18 is the same as your senior men's or women's player, right? You're wearing a similar jersey that a lot of other sports don't have. So it's a built-in advantage that rugby with this club system has. But again, who's feeling that and who's not? Right? Who is having that awesome social dynamic? Who's getting along great with their coach and feeling like they're part of something? And who's not? Or who doesn't see themselves in that, so they don't even walk in the door? Again, can we leverage the good things we got going and make sure that more people actually have access to it? Because again, the ultimate research, again, this is sort of a summary of decades worth of research. It makes a difference. If you don't feel that, you're less likely to stay, you're less likely to come back, and less likely to sign up to stay. And finally, we've got structural fractions, right? John talked about it, and this actually wasn't a pre-planned thing. It came up. What John was talking about actually is really, really strongly supported in the research, right? That appropriate or meaningful competitive experience. Not so hard that I'm just getting blown out and this feels pointless, but not so low that this is just boring. Right? So that level of challenge, right, where I'm being pushed to go just a little bit beyond what I can currently do, right? The more we can get engineer that for our players, provide that to players, the more likely they are to stay. Obviously, that is a tricky thing to come up with, right? We want to have everybody to have that experience. Everybody has different levels of capacity or of ability. So to the best of our abilities, within the constraints and the resources we have, to what degree can we find and manufacture and engineer and provide opportunities for that appropriate competitive experience, that meaningful level of challenge for athletes, whatever it is that they're looking at, wherever they're at. And the last one, we kind of got into it, right? Logistics. Right? Whether it's scheduling, whether it's travel, whether it's time, whether it's cost, right? If it's too hard to do or it costs too much or it's too big a pain, people won't do it. Right? It's straight up, if it gets in the way. Some of that we're not going to be able to solve. Ontario is huge, right? So what can we do? How can we get creative within that, right? To try and reduce the barriers, even if you can't get it to zero, but bring down those things that just might get in the way of someone having a super awesome, enjoyable experience in a great social setting, right? So they aren't forced out just because they can't get there, right? Or it's too big a hassle, or they can't afford it, right? So thinking through those logistics. Again, I know this is sort of summarizing outside, right? And I'm trying to kind of map it backwards onto some of the macro stuff we've seen. The point again isn't to point to any one thing that we must do to make everything work. It just is grounds to reflect on. Okay, so for the things that are going on in my club, to what degree are we sort of pulling on these levers to the best of our abilities?
I'm not sure where culture kind of fits into all this, or maybe culture. I think rugby has a different culture and how we treat each other, the game itself, the social factors and everything else that makes it different than maybe every other sport. I don't know too many sports that somebody at 70 goes out and trains 16-year-old and plays for the thirds, you know, or whatever. I don't know how that fits into this.
No, I totally agree with you on that one. That was actually what got me into. I started out with basketball, right? And I actually kind of got, not to slag basketball, but I got to take it sort of the absence of that, and then tried rugby came to the club culture. And it's just amazing, like you say, this lifetime participation, this connection, all together. And so that's where I think, again, this is not to I've been poking at stuff that maybe might frame as challenges, but the point of my presentation isn't to just be like all doom and gloom. But to say, well, what are the strengths that we do have? Like you say that, you know, you have unique elements that rugby can offer that maybe aren't as well developed in other sports, right? So how can we leverage that, right? Not lose that in trying to, in the issues we're trying to do, but make sure that more people actually realize how awesome that can be and actually feel part of that. And I think that's a great point.
I probably actually about the demographic data. And you're looking at sort of the rugby demographic data. How does that compare to, would you have those, that documentation for other sports, like, or just like sport in general, like how many athletes?
Are you this stuff or everything?
Like, based on ethnicity, like, involvement in sport is in general for minors and juniors and males across.
Yeah, I don't have that summarized here. I can tell you in broad strokes, okay, with some variation by particular sports in particular communities,
Yeah.
right? Because again, there are larger issues of culture. It looks like some version of this.
Okay.
Like it's in Ontario, one of the truisms is again, the not overrepresentation, but the strong representation of athletes who identify as white and the relative underrepresentation of athletes in racialized categories. That's a pretty strong finding. Again, the degree to which
Yeah.
varies a little bit, but no, that this is, so if it makes, I don't know if it makes it feel any better, we're in good company in this status. In my mind, that doesn't excuse it though, in terms of it still points us directions, both in terms of enactment moments, like who's not getting the chance to play the awesome sport that is rugby and be part of those awesome communities, right? But then also even a pragmatic sense, right? This is a huge, chunk of the population. There's room for growth here, right? If we wanted to look at that. So do you want to comment? No.
I'm just curious to know if there is a sport that's doing this well, it's evolving, like is skiing evolving, is tennis evolving from this demographic to a more different.
That's a good one. I can chat with you maybe a little more afterwards. I haven't done a sport by sport breakdown to compare with this. It's hard to. Actually, some of these you can guess it. And again, I'm not trying to like cover anybody up here, but to Rugby's credit, not a lot of sports are actually doing this data analytic work. And we're just at the front end of this. A lot of it is coming from sort of quick and dirty, report, have you participated in this sport in the last 12 months kind of thing, rather than sports actually, okay, who actually is signing up and showing up kind of stuff. But on the macro trends of those, some version of this is kind of like, so we're in good company, but don't. Sure, I'm gonna go there, and there, and there, and then I should move on to the last couple of things.
So I think one of the important things that was said earlier today, from our first keynote was that it's about being invited. And very often our invites miss the mark. So taking one of these in hockey, where we had, the hockey diversity group speak to us, the most visual representation of these charts compared to population is you put up this big hockey team and you put up a women's classical, and they were drastically different. And they were just two very real things you see every day that speak to, and I can say in my own association for hockey and for rugby, we put the invite out there. It's not being heard, so we have to take notice that we're not delivering the message the way it needs to be delivered, to be heard, to invite. I've seen changes at the high school level, because I think I would love to see this with high school, and see what this looks like in the high schools, to see if we're reaching more diverse population for high schools, or if it's the same. I would think maybe it would be a little bit more diverse, but I think the trends will still be somewhat the same. So we have to figure out what that message is to invite people in, because we've seen success when we can connect and reveal the invitation.
I think that these are key points here, and I'm glad so I'll just come back and then I'll go to a couple of questions and I'm done. I think that's a good point. Like you said, I think, and again, maybe I'm rose colored glasses. I think you've got an awesome thing, right? I think rugby can be awesome, amazing, and fun for everybody. But like I said, if that message isn't transmitted, if I don't feel that, like, why would I show up? Right? So figuring out what the messaging might be for the particular communities that we're serving will go a long way. And I think
Yeah, I was just gonna build on that, just, does this survey incorporate why or how, people are not participating, or why they dropped out, and why they're not being invited.
This is a good one. So this data I'm showing you here is pure like registration data. Like, okay, so no qualitative stuff. The player retention survey that some of you, maybe had you folks participate, starting to get a little more into that. I will tell you that is the single hardest group to reach in research and data collection is the people who aren't there.
Yeah.
And the people who left, and because they were so sick of it, which are probably the people who are least likely to fill out the survey for that thing. But if we can start to head that off, again, I think the player development survey is a great idea. When you catch people who are like, I'm thinking maybe I'm not gonna come back, or my kids aren't gonna come back. What's going on with that? So I think that is the next phase. So my short answer to that is stay tuned. We're still in this analytical environment. But I also think, and this will be a theme coming up in a little bit, it's also worth having conversation on the ground, too, right? If you notice the people drifting away, like, can you catch them and say, I noticed you haven't signed up again this year. Would you mind telling us what's going on here? And I think that idea of getting towards the opportunity for growth and how can we help? How can we make a good invitation versus a good bad judgment of what's going on here. Just looking to like, how can we take people, how can we bring more folks in? So is there one other question at the back there? Or?
I was just gonna ask you across from the data points, with salary or immigration status in terms of how long it's going to take here back in terms of carriers.
That's a great point. So I don't have it for this stuff, because all we have, the information we have is the information that's provided, like when you sign up. But I haven't gotten too far into it. That is big, especially when you get down to sort of combination of these elements. Do I feel welcome? Do I feel included if I'm sort of a newcomer to the community? And then, like you said, income status, and that is a big one. So we get into ideas of cost. Again, across the board, around the world, the lower your income status, the less likely you are to participate in sport. Right? It makes a difference. Especially, so that's why, again, like the tensions for all the things we're talking about. I don't need to just got me thinking about this when we talked about like finding the balance of talking about the benefits of weekends away, and weekends as a group. Absolutely support that. I like that, and especially maybe we talked about like a couple of times rather than just as like, if you don't want to be traveling every time, because that's what we know from other sports, but they're struggling with that, right? If your sport involves traveling every other week of the year and staying in a hotel, there's a very significant chunk of the population who just can't afford that. So it's about, so if we know in advance that we're going to do this and we think it's valuable, can we then work in structures to help support the groups who might need that without stigmatizing them, right? So it's thinking through those implications of all those. That's a great point. Right? That is a great point on this. So again, the dimensions of why this is happening that we need to poke at it and try to figure out. Okay, sorry, just for time, I'm going to keep bouncing along here. There's a couple more points that I want to get into. Again, this is great discussion so far. But I want to, again, get through a few more things here, and then maybe we can start talking about okay, what this actually means at the club level here. So, bouncing to coaches. This is sort of, and again, this is just total number of coaches, without regard for who they are, or where they're coaching, etc. Just like if you registered as a coach, it's some part of the registration in these years. Again, similar sort of graph that you've seen, a shape as you've seen. I will highlight one thing though. Well, we're having a glorious post-COVID bounce in the players. Right? I think John already highlighted that. This, right? We're about the same number of coaches as before. So if we have more players and the same number of coaches, that seems like that's setting up a problem. Right? Again, I don't know if that's reflected in your club or not. Right? But at the macro level, this is what we're seeing. So maybe again, it's worth reflecting on. Is this happening at our? Is this already a problem? Is it likely to become a problem? What can we or do we need to do about this? I'm gonna break this down a little bit more. Oh, sorry.
No, I'll ask you, it was just really like, are they the same coaches?
This is a great point. So this is the.
But it's because lots of new coaches come in, where are all the other coaches that left?
This is where we're at with this whole data set that I'm presenting right now is our preliminary analysis. We're looking year by year. We can't tell at the moment whether it's the same folks or new folks and swapping out, right? It's just, we're talking base rates here rather than individuals. Our next step now is to try and coordinate the data to actually track across and find out, is it the same folks who are coming back? Or is it, are we losing folks? Get some others in and then losing them again and in a constant chain.
I think it's also important that the first time you put numbers up, you put up the number of coaches as related to the number of teams rather than the number of players. Well, I think we all know the more players you have, the more coaches you need. We may not be doing our jobs at registering and identifying all of the assistants,
This is a
right? And how many people step up on the side of the rugby pitch to help? So I'm gonna pick one out of some of the other rugby coaches. I'm running a U16 practice, Mark's running the U12 before me at my mark. I've got 3 drills that need some help today. He's gonna step up. So there's really more coaches on the U16 team than just me, but I'm the only one on the list showing.
I think that's,
Mark's helped me 5 times.
I think that's a great point, and that was my caveat, and I was actually gonna bring that up in another segment, but I think that's good to keep in mind for all the data, especially for coaches as well. We're probably undercounting, as you mentioned, because it's sort of those informal roles that happen with the younger players, which we'll talk about in a second, right? So I think you're right. You shouldn't maybe make like absolute level distinctions. It's does the pattern hold, and to what degree is that actually playing out in your club?
Because the number of players would maybe reflect on just 25 players on the team instead of 70. And it's like that across the province, you can jump 700 players.
Exactly. So I think this is where, so this is a great point, point well taken. And this is where I think it's, again, we can look at the macro trends. But for me, where the rubber meets the road, it's is that actually, how is that actually playing out in my club? Is it like you say, or is it just like, oh, we got a few extra players per team, not a big deal, we got a lot of informal coaching, not a big deal? Or is this like, yeah, we got a flood coming and we're not prepared to deal with it, right? So recognizing in terms of making judgments of where we want to allocate time and resources in our club development plans and strategic plans. I think like, this is just a start. This isn't this is absolutely what's happening. This is the trend we're seeing at the big level. How is that playing out?
So I'm just wondering, to your point about the flood, I don't know, I know that 23 is kind of your last year, but I was kind of curious about the impact of Lona-Mare, number 1, and number 2 is the 2024 Olympics, like, you know, just more coaching 16 girls, and just anecdotally from what we're hearing from them, like it's impact. So I just wasn't sure if you had any indication on stuff going down the pipe.
No, that's a good point. So we've stopped our analysis. It's the full like just completeness at 2023. But the idea here is, again, you're just seeing sort of the first crack of this. The idea is to figure out, okay, what are the relevant indicators here that maybe we want to be tracking year by year by year? Because I think you're right. Right? Like they're a thing, again, just like COVID was a thing. You would expect to have some back, we're not sure how it's going out. Like you say, major successes at the international stage. You know, like, you talked about women's sport, you know, really coming into its own across different sports with professional leagues, et cetera. Like what impact is that having? I'd argue in some of the data I'll show in a second, it's maybe already starting that way. But I'm actually kind of looking forward to dipping into 24 and then hopefully 25, 26, et cetera, to see if we can track some of these things. Because again, this helps, it's not just because we just want to know if it's interesting, I mean, maybe there's that, but also it's like, where do we need to put the emphasis on? Is it at the micro, the club level, talking to individuals? Is it on massive publicity campaigns about things that are going on internationally or at the macro level? Like, what is the most bang for our buck in terms of, you know, getting people through the door, making them interested, keeping them interested? But that's a good point, right? Like there's all sorts of these big picture things that we need to take into account when trying to understand, you know, who's showing up and who's not. So I thought this is great. So just to keep going with that, talking about women's sports, this is that same graph broken down by gender. Right? So again, same conventions here. Green is males, purple is females. Right? Same pattern, right? Maybe as predicted, not necessarily a shock, right? But women coaches drastically underrepresented, right? In terms of potential contribution.
Do you have any insight into the discrepancy between those two, the trends between 2019 and 2021? Like, wouldn't you have expected the drop-off rate in females to mirror the drop-off rate in males?
That's a great question. And this gets into exactly the same, like, so what's going on, which we don't have in this data. So I was trying to figure out there, because the point I was going to, which, again, both the last couple of comments I've pieced together here, right? Like maybe the macro finding here is like, we need more women coaches, right? They're not, we don't have enough women coaches yet. But in the, like, the men have just barely gotten back to their 2019 levels, right? After a massive drop off here. I mean, when we talk about a floor effect, it's hard to go a lot lower here. Right? You can't get much steeper before you get to 0, right? But, and again, it's really low numbers, so I hesitate to overinterpret here, but it looks like the women are bouncing back up a little bit. So I'm wondering if some of these initiatives, lots of stuff, a lot of new initiatives, bringing more women and girls into coaching, supporting this prominence of female sports at the international level, might we be seeing some effectiveness of these efforts actually might help? We don't know if it's continuing yet, there's inkling of potential help.
Is it also possible that of the women coaches, they're just better at administration? And they're better at signing up than the men are?
It's not like, especially post-COVID, that could very well be, and that reflects, right? We don't know, so again, these are all open questions, I think, right? To me, the point of all of this analysis, everything I'm showing, is to say, what's going on there, and actually exploring that we don't know yet, so needing to poke into, and again, we're gonna poke at it from the macro scale, but also understanding, so you're looking at the folks in your club.
I think it's probably important to also understand if you put the y-axis in percentage, those two shapes aren't nearly as different as they look. Whatever you put in absolute numbers.
You're right.
I've got a 50% drop versus a 66% drop.
It's true, and then you talk about the drops from 2019 down to the bottom. Yep, I mean, it is, if you're looking at percentages there, it again, depends on how you want to frame this and your interpretation of it. And what I focused on is sort of this part down here, in terms of absolute numbers of who's there and who could be there, but again, there are many different ways to interpret the data, to analyze the data. Right? So again, for me, it's less important to say, this is absolutely the thing in the answer, and more just as a prompt to say, what's going on there? What's happening? Right?
So another thing with women's coaches is my sister falls in this category where competitive sports for women started in the mid-90s, and now they're having kids that are like 8 years old. So now they're getting more, and the more confident coaches better.
It is true, right? Like you said, good things are happening, but I'd even argue so. To me,
Push the kids in.
to me, this coming up here is promising, but it's still way lower than the green bar there. So, and again, you're right, these are all big macro things that are going on here. To me, the important part is looking at why are some people signing up, and again, with the caveat, that, again, maybe not capturing the informal coaches, people who are actually having them. Why are some folks signing up to help and coach, and some folks aren't?
And I'm not saying it's right, it'd be interesting to also see a graph that correlates female coaching with female participation versus male coaching with male participation, just to see if there's a, like, looking at those two separate charts against each other, if there's any other correlation.
That's a good point, and we don't have that data here, that we would have liked to map that out, we don't have that. But again, I think this is great stuff, this is exactly what we're going for. It's again, there's not one answer coming out of this. It's taking a look at this and saying, what's going on there, why might this be happening, what else might be going on?
It does look small, that's a 200% increase in female coaching. Right, that's awesome.
With, I mean, yeah, these are absolute numbers here, 2%, but the absolute numbers are still a little small too, so it's like,
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I totally agree with the.
At the macro level, I think it's nice to see that it's.
Exactly, yeah. So reason for optimism, but still reason for actions. I think, and again, how that actually plays out in your club, I think that's the work. And highlight one, please. Oh, yes. So one of the things, so we talked about this. This is a rare reading on this one. I'm gonna set this up a little bit. Sorry. So we talked about, you know, if the athletes are going up, but the coaches are staying the same, depending on, and maybe this is like an oversimplified idea. What are we gonna do about that? One of the options is to try and grow your own. I think a lot of the things that were presented in the last session, game and club development, relate to that, right? With our game leaders, things like that. The idea of grow your own, right? How can we get more involved? So we don't have the data right now, again, individually linked to see who transitioned from athlete into coach, but the closest proxy that we do have, we can look at folks who are dual registered. Right, as a very rough, extremely, and again, you can poke holes in this all day, but it's at least, I think, maybe an opening to start thinking about this. Number of folks who were registered, concurrently registered in any given year as both an athlete of some level, any level, we left it open, minor, junior, seniors, potentially, and as a coach. So what we see, yeah, pretty similar pattern. If you look at the absolute numbers, it's about a third of your coaches are also were actively registered as athletes at the same time. Again, different depending on the club and how much actually went through the process. It's a broad strokes trend. Again, even more response here. The male coach, female coach distinction here, yeah, even more reflective, right? So it's still that line going up, right? In terms of the absolute level, still lower, still got lots of room to grow in terms of getting our women coaches involved here, encouraging and making women coaches feel welcome, but the line is going up, right? So potentially room for optimism. So again, to me, it's not like an absolute is it, isn't it? But it's saying, what are we doing that might be working? What are we not doing that could be helpful? Right? Another thing I wanted to plug, again, just because the game leaders idea ties in nicely to this. We tried to map out, and again, this is probably the most subject to the maybe not officially registering as a coach. This one is players registered as a coach and as a junior versus as a coach and a senior player. Right? I almost didn't put this here because this is basically flat. Right? We're talking single digits here. Again, there's probably an underrepresentation for the more informal roles helping out. Right? But speaking to this idea, if we need more coaches, and this is something that, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, sort of my last point here. If we need more coaches, there's a big difference in strategy between trying to arm wrestle a whole bunch of adults who've already disconnected from the sport, right? Or maybe just showing up because their kids there, versus trying to build your own, making sure that your players who are still there, right, actually think of coaching as an option, as a way to keep being involved in your club. Right? So just to highlight whether, is this an untapped market, right? The juniors coaching, and again, maybe your club's already doing this, maybe it's informal, maybe it's not capturing the data, right? I know I got my start in basketball coaching in a little kids rec, like local rec league that was coached almost entirely by high school students when I was a high school student. To what degree are we tapping into that workforce? Think of it cynically, right? As rugby. Or also thinking of developing leaders, is that another element of what we can bring to the experience of playing junior with us?
Being the privacy guy, I'm not gonna ask you to go into small cell counts, but when you look at the data, I'd be very interested when you come back in subsequent years, about whether you see a correlation between coaches as parents and kids of coaches who are also listed as, because I'm pretty sure that most of those 20 kids probably have parents. But why I bring it up is because it speaks to that culture issue that was brought up earlier, and that maybe that is a leverage point that clubs really ought to focus on a little bit more, that actually shows a bind, or whether it's a strong or a weak tide, it seems to be a tide between those points.
Well, I think you're totally right. Like you said, how are these kids actually getting into, like you say, is the parent who's a coach then bringing along, like what is the path there? I almost need to thank you. That's a perfect setup for exactly where I'm going at. So I don't have that data for the Rugby Federation right now, right? But we actually are in the midst of finishing up a research study against sport general, the regulars in it across. Oh, sorry, by the way, I should say, quick shout out to the officials. We haven't finished analyzing the officials data yet. The broad strokes seems to look very similar, right? More players, officials that are the same. We haven't got as many coming back. We haven't done all those. So sorry, I just forgot that earlier. That's why I'm not intentionally not presenting officials, we just haven't got all the TV analysis yet. But it's looking like a similar thing. But in terms of this, like, okay, so for the kids who are, or any kids who aren't captured here, why do they? We actually literally ran a research study, finishing the data, so trying to look at successful cases. So people who continued coaching as a direct transition from youth sport, we're back into coaching. So not the parent coaches, who are wonderful and great, we don't want to lose them. But we're saying if we only rely on them, we maybe don't have as many coaches as we possibly could. So I'm going to do this really quickly, right? Basically, our findings suggest something like this, and I'll super quick walk you through it. Okay? What we're found for those people who were successfully engaged, so again, it gets to those like those kids who maybe had that, it actually follows. I think this aligns pretty well. First up, so the sort of red arrows in the middle here, that's all stuff that's happening while the person is an actual competing athlete. Again, it's across sport, it's not just rugby, right? But it all starts with a positive youth sport experience. Hopefully that's what we're trying to do anyway, right? But meaningful, engaged, positive social scenario, right? Positive development there. Creating that good sport experience. Turns out that's also the base, the necessary base for actually creating more coaches, right? Only if we have that, is there even consideration of why would I want to get back to this here, right? What we find though, very few of the coaches in our study who successfully came back knew that they wanted to be a coach and were willing to run through walls just to become a coach. Right? What it required was someone close to them, right? Or a coach who they had a good relationship, a sibling, a neighbor, something like that, who coached. But then realize, oh, this is a thing that people do. My coach, you always get the things, but little kids seeing their teachers out in out in public, and it's a scary thing because I've never thought of them as an actual real person. Right? They need to see that coaches are people, right? Someone close to them, that, oh, this is a thing that real people who like the sport, who I know can do. So create the, like, this is an option for me. Right? This was a critical point. Every single person significantly engaged talked about having someone like that. They're like, oh, that's a thing. That's a thing that people do. It isn't just some magical box, that, like teachers, that you just come out and I have no idea who these people are. Right? Secondly, there had to be some opportunity facilitated by someone other than that person. Call this the shoulder tap. Right? So maybe what you're getting at there. They're like, hey, why don't you come along? Why don't you just try this out? I need an extra hand for this pill. Why don't you show up with yourself? I think you'd be good at this. Right? Very few of the people we talked to in our group got into coaching without that. Right? Without somebody saying, putting that seed in their brain, is like, oh, I think you could do this. You might like it. Right? They had to be shown, they didn't fight for themselves. They had to be invited in by someone they respected, role model, that they look up to, who said, why don't you try it? Low stakes, just easy, just see if you like it. Right? Providing those informal opportunities, which is where the game management might actually come in. Right, or the game leaders thing might be an interesting tool here, right? That's the low stakes involvement where I can get involved, I can try it out, I can learn, I can see what I like, what I don't like, right? The more folks, and these are young people here, had that opportunity, the more likely they were to say, okay, this is a thing that I actually want to do, and I want to continue. And it was only at that point, after they'd seen a role model, been shoulder tapped, had some informal opportunities within their club, that they actually make the decision to actually, okay, so what do I need to do to actually be a coach here? To go to get to the certification, to go to get the stuff, that's where tangible logistical facilitation by clubs helps. Can I pay for the training costs? Can I bring it in so they don't have to travel 2 hours to sit in a room with 20 strange adults that you don't know? Right? Can the clubs help that process, smooth those bumps to make it easier? Right? And that's what we found was the process. Once they got involved and they started having rewarding experiences, as soon as they could see that they were making a difference, right, that contributed back to them creating positive experiences for the next generation. The kicker I'll leave you with is that even outside of rugby, we talked about culture, this came up in every single setting. In other sports, or maybe it isn't even so common, right? Every single person who reported successfully going through this pathway reported that they felt like they were, when they were in this process, they were part of something bigger than just their team. This was a community. They were looking for ways that are realizing that people can stay involved in different ways other than just showing up to practice and running around and then going home. Right? So that was the baseline context for all of this, is realizing this is a community that isn't just about me running around. That many people do many different things and we're all part of this together. It's coming to a point about community. That's actually showing up in our research at that support point. And again, I think a strength that rugby might build on. And that you've kind of got that set, you've got that club structure built there. Again, the question is just, this leads me to the last point here. Who feels like they're part of it? This is the big question. Who gets shoulder tapped, right? We talked about it, it's the coaches, it's the kids of coaches, right? Well, do we have a whole bunch of other juniors, right? Young people who might make amazing coaches, but they just never get the shoulder tap, right? Are we relying on personal connections? The kid I get along with really well. The kid whose family has been members for 40 years, which is great. We don't want to lose them. But we probably can't get by if they're the only kids who get shoulder tapped. Right? So understanding who gets access to the cycle, who is facilitated here, who gets fully brought in, invited in a way that's meaningful for them to the awesomeness that is rugby in the club system. So, running out of time, so we might not do this in the full way. Take a last comment here, then I'll sort of wrap up.
I didn't know what I was doing was called shoulder down. I had a 14-year-old kid, 6'6", 260, come out for the first time. His parents said we wanted to play rugby. And I didn't know how to teach a young man that big how to be a rugby player. I teach him skills, and very safe. We got a couple of players, senior men players, 20s, 30s. And I went up to them and I said, look, there's things that you do as a big man that I would never know how to do. Meet Jason. Teach him how to be a big man, a big rugby player. And I did that with a few different guys, different examples. What struck me was the look on their faces. That somebody actually asked me to go and help a young player, a younger player. And the kid said, oh, he's actually spending enough time to get something specialized. I didn't know I was doing shoulder tap, but thank you for that.
So first of all, that's important. We know that, again, most, again, who don't come through the Connect Kids pathway, that shoulder tap reports, what you're doing there matters, and like you said. The response that people get, because really what that means is, I see something in you. Right, I see something valuable in you that I think you can share. And again, like you talked about there, it's just like how to be a big guy, right, in the sport. Most of the folks who talk about getting their shoulder tap, they weren't saying, you're perfectly ready to be a coach and I'm gonna hand you a team by yourself right now. They're saying, you got this one thing you're pretty good at, do you want to share it? You don't have to be all things to all people, right? You got one thing, right? You're good at motivating people, you're really good at this little skill. Well, I think you might enjoy talking, right? Just have to be one little thing that's worth the shoulder tap, right? That opens the door and you can learn the other stuff. So it turns out that is a very meaningful and important part of the process for helping people say, oh, this is a thing that I actually want to do year over year. And you can come back to that. So thank you for that. Okay. So again, I'm running myself out of time here. Again, this is a great discussion. So we've actually covered a lot of the stuff that I was going to get into next. We have 1 minute. I think I'm running us out of time here. Apologies. So I'll do this maybe in a more hypothetical, right? So the first, again, I'm kind of hammering this all the way through. But again, for me, the point of data is not that it solves all the problems or tells absolute truths, but it's just saying, you know, what's happening out there? What's going on, right? Or might be going on. And then is that, or to what degree are those representative, those findings, those issues, those tensions or those successes, are they representative of what's actually happening in my club? Key kicker, how do I know? Am I actually tracking this, or is it just because like, well, I know those 6 kids, because they're my friends' kids and they're still here 5 years later, right? Are we actually tracking this in any meaningful way? It doesn't have to be difficult, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Maybe you're just looking at your own registration data, your own team lists, etc. Who's coming back? Who's not coming back? Right? Whatever is meaningful in these dimensions, are there easy ways that we can track these things of the issues that we think are most relevant there? To actually see what's going on. Because again, it's easy to not see what isn't there. The study and dropouts problem. Right? If they're not there, we don't notice it, and then everything looks rosy in front of us. Right? Until we notice, okay, well, who's left? Who started 2 years ago and now is not here anymore? Right? Can't get that if we can't track it. So it can be done easy stuff. I'll also put a plug in from my side of the coin here in the academic world. If you're in a university town or close, you can come up and ask me about this. This is a great thing for graduate students, master students. Right? You might want to work with the club if you're saying, I just want to help tracking this stuff and analyzing this stuff. Might not work 100% of the time, but many graduate students in kinesiology programs, sports science programs will be very open to anything like this. So I just want to track this and see how we're doing. Right? So just a little plug there for that one. Last thing, right? Again, it's not just like what's going bad, right? What are the challenges, but also what's working well. What are the successes we have? Who is still here? Who's having an awesome time? What's the feeling for them? Right? What lessons can we learn from them and how we made that happen to see if we can help other people have that, right? To expand that offering, to bring everybody in under the umbrella to the awesome experience. And again, these are just the things that I took away. You might have different takeaways, right? In terms of what we looked at today or anything else you're thinking of, right? In terms of the strengths of the juniors, what's going on there? In terms of gender gaps, in terms of our lack of diversity, right? In terms of developing and supporting coaches or officials or anything else that came up, right? Just that reflective of like, okay, so these are happening at the micro level. Is this happening in my club? Are we doing anything well? What can we learn? What can we expand? What are the challenges that we want to direct those energies to? And again, I ran us out of time here for the discussion. I was going to have us do it, but hopefully, I think we've got some good discussions going into the session. Right? It's the idea of finding those common grounds. Seems like many clubs, many groups are experiencing similar issues, right? Like, you know, I'm a big fan of the many brains tackling the problem idea, right? Or somebody's figured something out. So like share the wealth so that everybody doesn't have, you know, individual clubs, individual programs don't have to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's got something that actually works, right? So if we can share those lessons, what's working for us, what are we struggling with? Let's share around so we can, again, so we get the rising tide floats all boats kind of idea. Okay, last question, and then I'm shutting down here because I'm already over time.
Do you have any colleagues or associates doing this with other potential clients across? Because I'm curious to know what the health of the rugby is.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of people doing this exact sort of stuff with others, but I'm certain it's possible that people are doing this. Maybe I can look into that. Maybe in future years, I can give you a report back on that. Focus just on today for now. All right. Again, I've run out of time. Thanks very much. Let's have more discussion.
There you go. Thank you, Carl. It's appreciation of our thank you. Hopefully you see how this is just the beginning. This is very much the start of this and the diving into it and continuing it. So thank you, Carl, and your team, and we look forward to using that. For now, though, we're back to our breakout rooms. So, Joss, where are we going? We got
Strategic marketing,
strategic marketing over in the classroom over to that side.
coaches, we're gonna be kitty
Coaches
corner in the
down
far
this
corner
way.
here.
Gary will lead you.
Match officials are gonna stay. Okay, here, match officials for virtual will be streamed on the same link. Strategic marketing will be streamed on a separate link, which I put in the chat for them as well.